Hey there, welcome into Unpaid Interns. We are recording today. I'm actually recording on December 30th, but it is December 31st when you're watching it, our final Unpaid Interns episode of the semester. Glad for you joining us today. And of course, the Outback Bowl coming up on Saturday. We are joined by, a reporter with both IU and Ole Miss connections. Courtney Robb joins us. She's the sports reporter at WCBI Sports in Columbus, Mississippi, covering Ole Miss sports, but she's also an IU alum, so she knows both sides well. Courtney, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
Doing good. Happy to be here. I feel very honored that I am the final podcast of the 2020 year for you guys, so hopefully we can wrap this up on a good note. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, hopefully you can wrap up a tough year for everyone on a good note, at least for Unpaid Interns. And I wanted to start with Ole Miss football. I mean, it just sounds like a strange atmosphere right now, a 4-5 season, obviously very exciting, but dealing with a lot of injuries and opt-outs. What's kind of the scene right now around Lane Kiffin's bunch in Oxford?
Yeah, so obviously Lane Kiffin was hired last December, so December 2019, and it was before everything had essentially popped off throughout the world with the pandemic. So came into a team where he thought, he was going to have spring practice. He was going to get to know his team and kind of figure more stuff out. And as we know, that's not how the season ended up turning out. And so he didn't even, obviously, like most, have any non-conference games to kind of fare, what was going to go on. So there's a lot of, conversation about the 4-5 season, and why an Ole Miss team that went 4-5 qualified for the Outback Bowl. I think normally you see this game be more of like an 8-win SEC team as opposed to obviously a 4-win, which is a remarkably big difference, obviously. But Lane is doing some good things. I think, honestly, we've seen much improvement from quarterback Matt Corral. I'm sure Lane had something to do with that and just his style of play and how he used Corral this year, considering we didn't know coming into the season and for the first game or so who was going to be the starting quarterback or if Ole Miss was once again going to opt for a 2-quarterback system. So what Lane has done with Corral and what he has done with the offense, I think has been, a huge improvement for this team. They're obviously averaging over, 40 points a game. They're, I think, the 4th team in the country in offense, potentially. Don't quote me on that. I'm not 100% sure, but definitely high up there for FBS schools. So there's definitely some good things that have happened. It's really just been the defense this year that has struggled. And I think if you had more consistency on that side of the ball, this Ole Miss team should have probably had 2 more wins. And then, if you look at if they would have had a non-conference, schedule, I think you would have seen them probably with, 2 more wins there as well. So obviously 4-5 is a great no. But for Lane's first year, especially with everything going on, I think it's fair to, kind of give Ole Miss the benefit of the doubt and recognize them for having legitimate strengths.
Now, Ole Miss will be without 2 of its best players, Elijah Moore and Kenny Yobo, leading wide receiver, leading tight end, both opted out to declare for the NFL draft. I guess what was interesting to me, though, is they opted out before the last game of the regular season against LSU. Ole Miss still put up 45 points. I know there's more injuries right now with Ole Miss, potentially with their starting running back and another top wide receiver. But is this still an offense, even though a little bit depleted, that should be able to put up a lot of points potentially on Saturday in Tampa?
Yeah, so obviously, like you mentioned, Kenny Yobo, their tight end, as well as Elijah Moore, their leading receiver, opted out before that LSU game. And, I found that interesting too, because we were actually able to see how Ole Miss performed without both of them. And just like you mentioned, they still did very well on offense. Obviously, there were some issues with turnovers, as well as it was really defending the pass in that game as to why they, didn't end up getting the win over LSU. But The offense wasn't much of an issue. That being said, who replaced them was wide receiver Braylon Sanders. He had 4 receptions, 70 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He did exit that game with an injury, as well as running back Snoop Connor and Jerry and Ely. I think you can expect to see, as you normally would, make up the ground game. I believe Ely also was a bit banged up after that LSU game, so it's going to be interesting to see if Sanders and Ely are both able to come in. I think that will affect them a ton if they're both injured and unable to play that game. That being said, we also saw a freshman kind of have a breakout game. Henry Parrish had 16 carries, 82 yards, and 2 touchdowns in that LSU game too. That being said, LSU is a remarkably different team than Indiana, and I think LSU obviously we saw right away this season when they played Mississippi State, especially with how Mississippi State's season has turned out, that LSU is not their typical LSU team. It's definitely a rebuilding year, and they've had a ton of opt-outs and everything too. So, you know, there's 2 sides to if Ole Miss can kind of, you know, I think they can create offense. Obviously, they're missing a ton of weapons, but I still think if they are going to struggle against Indiana, it will probably come from the defensive side of the ball.
You mentioned Matt Corral earlier, Ole Miss's starting quarterback, sophomore, much improved this season. It's similar to Jack Tuttle, both from Southern California. Indiana's quarterback, both were Elite 11 quarterbacks, as some of the top recruited quarterbacks in their draft. I guess, how has he fit into Lane Kiffin's new offense, and what has made him one of the most effective passers this year in all of college football?
Yeah, so I think when Matt played last year and he was competing with John Rice Plumlee for the job, it was a lack of consistency that we were seeing from him. And I think we still have seen issues of that from Corral this year. Now, the good thing about Kiffin's offense is it's very up-tempo and it's very fast. And that is a problem for teams if they cannot keep up with them, because Ole Miss will just go for it every single time. And where we've seen Ole Miss make mistakes is when they are too up-tempo and they kind of rush decision-making. And Corral has definitely owned that part. That's why he has 14 interceptions on the year. And that's a huge issue, especially going up against an Indiana team that, you know, leads the nation in interceptions. And I would expect them to try to take advantage of that. But that being said, I think Corral took a lot of time to improve on his game and make better decisions. And going along with just what, you know, the kind of quick and fast tempo that Kiffin's offense provides, you know, Corral's a much better passer, a more efficient passer than he is, you know, in the ground game. Not that he isn't as good in the ground game, but you see them making better decisions. And, you know, that's something that you really need to succeed in the SEC, is to have kind of that equal offense. And I think Ole Miss does a pretty good job with it, as, you know, we can see from their numbers, and the numbers don't lie. So I think he, you know, we weren't sure how he was going to be this year, just given the inconsistencies that we saw from him last year. And we still saw bright spots. They still had a lot of games against very good teams under Matt Luke that probably could have been wins if, again, there had been maybe just a little bit more consistency. Granted, he did share a lot, you know, of the reps with John Rice Plumlee. And that was, you know, I think everybody thought coming into this year, we were going to see JRP as the starting quarterback. And it was kind of a shock, I think, to a lot of people to see that Corral was really competing for the starting job and ultimately ended up getting the starting job, right? So I think, you know, just his focus on being able to calm down a little bit and just make better decisions, and not so much hasty decisions, but quick, you know, calculated decisions, finding his receivers, and, you know, letting the offensive line do its job in protecting him.
Now, you mentioned the numbers don't lie about the Ole Miss offense being one of the top offenses in the country, but they also don't lie about the Ole Miss defense being one of the worst defenses statistically in all of Division I football this year, and has Indiana fans really licking their chops about potentially what the Indiana offense can do. I guess, what are the problems with this Ole Miss defense? And what can the Rebels defense do potentially to slow down Indiana, or is it just kind of a lost cause at this point? They've given up 40 points in 5 of their 9 games this season.
Yeah, I think the defense obviously is the glaring stat. I mean, they're 127 out of 127 FBS teams in total defense. They allow, I think it's 537 yards per game, I want to say, which is awful, and it's the reason that you have seen Ole Miss lose games that they're putting up more than 40 points. If Alabama doesn't score 60 points on them, especially in the last few minutes, that was a legitimate game that they had with, I think at the time, Alabama was the top 2 team in the country, if not the top team in the country. And so, that was a great showing for Ole Miss that they kind of let slip away because their defense has just struggled, specifically struggled in pass defense. We saw it against LSU. Specifically, there was one receiver who was doing all of the work for the Tigers in that game that for whatever reason, Ole Miss had a very hard time containing. And Lane has talked about that and talked about how their defensive stats obviously not great. Now, what they need to do to kind of, or what they're planning on doing to change that in a game, I'm not 100% sure. I do know that one of their defensive coaches is not returning for the next year. I'm not sure. I would assume that he's also not returning for this game. So I imagine that in the offseason is really where we're going to see them make a lot of changes to the defense, whether that's, getting new staff members or whatever it might be. I don't think we should probably see a ton from this game. Granted, the good thing is they haven't had any other opt-outs as far as we know and aren't planning on having any. So at least they'll have, a total, team to where they have to rely on their normal players. But in terms of, do I think they can make a dramatic difference in defending Indiana? Absolutely not. Not in one game. I just don't think it's feasible. And I think, hopefully in the offseason, they'll make more of those changes. And they're probably more than likely going to just stick to trying to outscore the other team, which is what, they do a lot. And as we've seen, it's not sustainable. And Indiana is one of the higher scoring teams in the Big Ten too. So now, will we see them put up Ole Miss numbers? I'm not so sure. But Indiana's defense is also remarkably better than a lot of the defenses that Ole Miss has seen this season that, might be trouble for them. And if Indiana can kind of, defend the pass, and especially since I think they may end up relying a little bit more on the run, if they can do that too, then I think they have a very good shot of beating Ole Miss. And, at the end of the day, Ole Miss wants to win this game. They don't have a ton to lose. In this game, it's their first time in a bowl game since the 2015 season. And since they had a 2-year bowl ban, and since they didn't make it last year because of a tragic, end of the season, losing the Egg Bowl by just kind of one mistake and a missed kick. So I think Ole Miss altogether is happy to, be in a bowl game. Kiffin said that they're looking at Indiana like playing another SEC opponent, which is, very true in terms of level of play. And they're just looking at it as a very good opportunity, and one that they normally would not have in the Outback Bowl. They normally would not be playing a top 10 team in the Outback Bowl. And so I think they're just going to take advantage, use it more as, a learning experience. And if they can get a win, hey, no harm done, right?
You're kind of touching on my next question. We've heard from Lane Kiffin these last couple of days. He's trying to convince some players to actually play in the bowl game. I guess, where is the motivation for this game for Ole Miss? Obviously, they haven't won a bowl game now in a while. But Indiana, I mean, they are very much amped up. We're hearing from their players about kind of making a statement to the college football playoff world about disrespect and not making it to the New Year's Six Bowl. I guess where is the motivation level for Ole Miss to win this game, or is it more as kind of you just said, well, we're going to go play and we have nothing to lose, and if we win, well, it's an upset, and there we go.
Well, I think the way Kiffin is approaching, where he's trying to motivate his team to win, it's something he's told us is his players should be excited because they are playing a very good team. Now, I think you have probably the other side of the coin of where some players probably think we're playing a really good team. What are the chances of us actually winning this game? That's not something he's explicitly expressed. That's just an assumption I'm making. But I think he's really going in saying you have a very good opportunity to play a very good team and finish the season out on a good note. And, as long as they're able to go legitimately toe-to-toe with a top 10 team, I think Ole Miss will end the season on a relatively good note. I think the SEC and specifically SEC fans always just have this very high expectation for whatever team they follow. And obviously falling, 4-6 if they lose to Indiana is not meeting that expectation. And, it's a heavy burden for a first-year coach. But I think, Kiffin, any coach is going to say any opportunity we can play to improve and to play a good team, we're going to take. And I think that's kind of just how, Ole Miss is looking at it. And, if they can get a win, then not only is it obviously their first year back in the bowl game in 5 years, but they also obviously have the chance to get a win. And, I'm not going to say it's not a gimme game for Indiana. And, as much as maybe people want to believe, I think it could potentially be closer than, maybe people are anticipating. And that's, strictly just from looking at how Ole Miss plays their offense, which is, a bit of a different offense than you see in the Big Ten and then maybe Indiana has seen this season. So I think the matchup between both of them is just such an, interesting thing to watch because you haven't seen that a lot, I think, in the Big Ten this year. As you see a lot of these kind of like very high tempo offenses in the SEC a little bit more. I think probably the closest you would obviously get to that is in Ohio State, which, we saw how it worked for Indiana. But other than that, I think, again, Ole Miss Kiffin's just saying, hey, this is a good game. This is a good team. You should want to be excited about this. And we have a good opportunity to kind of show people what we're about and to, keep turning the program around from a lot of the struggles they faced over the last few years with NCAA sanctions and the bowl ban and not being able to recruit the players they wanted. And, Kiffin trying to finally take over and, turn Ole Miss into a legitimate SEC contender every year.
Wondering for you, I mean, Lane Kiffin is one of the most, I guess, dynamic personalities really in college football. Certainly a big name, comes into Oxford, had certainly some press conferences this year that have gotten some attention. What's it just been like covering the program this year, especially obviously in a very strange season for college football?
So Lane Kiffin, and I think this kind of like sums up his probably personality perfectly, came off of like an Ole Miss jet when he was hired a year ago, and he immediately is like, pumping his fist in the air. He's, meeting fans, he's kissing babies, he's doing, all this kind of pomp and circumstance like stuff when he got there. And there was a lot of hype around hiring him. And I do think he was a good hire, and he was an attractive hire. As the state of Mississippi has been making a lot of good, attractive football hires in the last year, which has been very exciting. Kiffin is interesting in the sense of you expect him to be more, I think, outwardly. He's very low key in the way that he kind of presents himself, I think, in press conferences. You see a lot of, him throwing the clipboard in the air and a lot of, he's very expressive on the sideline. not that expressive in press conferences, which is, kind of interesting, much more low key. And the jokes that he does make, he just throws in as casual conversation. I think we look back at the Kentucky game, and I think he was saying we should thank their kicker and send them a Christmas present for, I think, missing an important kick that got them the win. And he didn't say it like in a joking manner. He just slipped it into conversation. And he does that all the time. He's just very, chill, very low key in his press conference. Not so much that kind of outwardly expressive person that we see on, live TV during game day. And that's always been, pretty interesting. But, I enjoy covering him. I think he's good with the media. He answers our questions. And that's all, we can really ask from him. But he's been good to cover this year, especially, in a year where things have been so weird. It's been interesting to have kind of a first-year coach to kind of come and look at, and he's honest about the things they need to do better at. He's honest about the strengths that they have, and definitely not a coach who minces words or is scared to hurt anybody's feelings. So.
IU and Ole Miss were not really projected to play in a bowl game together. A lot of people had IU going to the Fiesta Bowl, but things got weird on kind of selection Sunday for bowl games. Ended up getting matched up. I mentioned that you're an IU alum, and now you've covered Ole Miss football for the last couple of years. What was it just like for you finding out they were going to play each other? And I guess, what are you expecting the next couple of days to be like with so many connections with both programs for you?
Yeah, so it was very, I guess, bittersweet for me, just in the sense of IU had a year that I had never gotten to see before, and it was a year that I never experienced as a student. When I went to Indiana, Kevin Wilson was the head coach when I was there my first couple of years. Then he got fired, replaced with Tom Allen. And it was still very much in the beginning, the Indiana team that we were used to. When we were, when I would go to football games, it was, if you ended up going to football games, even because nobody cared about the team, Indiana wasn't a football school. But even if you went, obviously you left at halftime or the third quarter, and, so there wasn't all that kind of hype around Indiana that you're seeing now. So it's been very exciting for me to see Tom Allen turn this team around over the course of the last couple of years, and be a legitimate Big Ten contender. And, I do think that they were gypped out of a New Year's Six game. I think they more than deserve that. And to be honest, they weren't going to make the college football playoff, because you're going to have pretty much the same 4 teams in there every single year, which, we can get into, the whole dynamic of that. But you knew that at the very least, Indiana deserved to be in a very good game. I'm personally not super upset about it, because I haven't had the opportunity to not only watch, to cover Indiana in the last few years being in the SEC. So I've had to kind of just be, a bystander, and it's exciting for me to be able to, attend Tom Allen press conferences and post highlights and all that sort of thing. So I'm not mad about it. I do wish it was in a different year, because unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to go and attend a game in person, because we just can't do a whole lot while we're there. And so, just, going all that way, to sit in a press box doesn't make a whole lot of sense for some people. So that's the unfortunate thing, is I wish it had been during a time where I could be there and enjoy the experience. But I think it's still cool to be able to watch a team that I cover match up to my alma mater. And and Indiana a few years ago, you would have seen the matchup to any SEC team and be like, well, the chance of them beating them is, slim to none. And so I think now Indiana has a very good opportunity to get a win against an SEC team, and a win that, Indiana in a bowl game hasn't seen in many, many years. And so I know it's disappointing for a lot of fans, and I'm disappointed too that Indiana didn't get the game they deserved. And there's, obviously a lot of different intricacies of why that's not happening. But you kind of just have to take it for face value and, be happy that they're going to go and play in this game and hopefully get a win. I'm telling people I'm pleading the fifth in terms of if I'm rooting for either side. Obviously, as someone covering the game, I'm not, going to be actively cheering for, nor do I actively root for Ole Miss to win or for Ole Miss to lose on any regular given day. Do I think it's cool that they're playing a team that I love watching? Absolutely. And would it be cool for me to see Indiana get a win? Yes. But it also makes my job a little bit easier if Ole Miss can pull off a win as well. So I'm just excited to see how the two match up and to see Indiana play an SEC team, because the caliber of football in the SEC is very high. And so I still think it'll be a good matchup. And as disappointing as it might be for fans to, that they didn't get the game that they wanted, and they think they got cheated. And, I definitely can stand with a lot of them and, be very sympathetic for. I do feel they probably deserved a little bit better, because the last time I think that's the first time the Outback Bowl has actually had a top 10 team play in their bowl game, which says a lot about kind of, what's going on. But still think it's a good game. I'm still excited to cover it. I can't wait to, attend the virtual pressers and, run the highlights, and, I'm going to take it, for what it is. And it's exciting for me to be able to see.
Obviously you have familiarity with the Indiana program, but probably not too many people in Mississippi do, as most people on the national stage not very familiar with Indiana football just because they've been so bad for so long. I guess what's the perception of IU football right now in Oxford and in Mississippi from the locals and fans there?
Well, I think IU kind of years like the NCAA football darling in some kind of instances, especially with Tom Allen and, the videos that get posted everywhere of him. And it's hard not to love Tom Allen, and it's hard to not want to run through a brick wall for that man, just with how, passionate he is about his team. And it's been interesting just because I feel like a few years ago, talking about Tom Allen, and I did get to experience it because I did cover football when I was in college, was people all of a sudden kind of went from thinking Tom Allen was a little bit too emotional to now being this like very passionate coach. And it's kind of been like reversed a little bit. So I think, obviously most people in the SEC and Mississippi and Oxford haven't had a whole lot of experience with Indiana, except for maybe last year when they started to kind of be better on a more national stage, as well as have a very good year this year. So I think people are kind of taking Indiana to be a, what they are right now, a top 10 team. I don't think they have a whole, lot of expectation for it. And I don't know that, people in Mississippi have paid a ton of attention. There's a good amount of people in Mississippi who are from Indiana. I've met a very good portion of people who tell me that, they are from the state. And so I'm sure those people kind of have some, experience with it. But, I think it's going to be hard to find most people who aren't rooting for IU in this game in some, aspects. I think it's a lot more attractive for Indiana to get the win to a lot of people, especially on, the national stage, as it maybe is for Ole Miss to get the win. So I think obviously people in Oxford and Ole Miss fans want their team to get the win. But I think the general fan base is probably rooting for Indiana. But again, I think obviously Indiana fans, I'm sure, aren't happy to be playing a 4-5 Ole Miss team. But I think Ole Miss fans are more than excited to be playing a top 10 Indiana team that has garnered a lot of attention over the last few months.
Two more questions for you, Courtney. I'll start with this. We've kind of broken down the game. What do you see as the key for either Ole Miss or Indiana or both to pull out a victory on Saturday at Raymond James Stadium?
Yeah, I think if, we had to talk about the key is just Matt Corral, protecting the ball, making smart decisions, kind of like we've talked about, and not just making like quick, hasty decisions that's going to cost them interceptions, because Indiana will take advantage of it, I think, every single time, as well as just trying to, prepare their defense a little bit more than they've performed. We cannot be having these, games where they're allowing over 500 yards from the offense. And, Ole Miss cannot, keep making these mistakes in the pass defense. And so I think Indiana will more than likely take advantage of their weaknesses. But I think if, Ole Miss can do what they do and have that, up-tempo offense that we've been talking about and kind of keep to what they've done this season and what they know and not make these little mistakes. The little mistakes is where I think it's hurt Ole Miss, and it's cost them a few of their games. And I think you can see a couple of games on their schedule that would look a little bit differently if they had just, finished. And Lane Kiffin has talked about, finishing games the right way. And so it sounds like it's simpler than, maybe the answer people are looking for. But I think, the stats don't lie. And I think Ole Miss defense has just been such an issue that they have to buckle down in some aspect of that. And if they can do that, and, Corral can, protect the football better, that we've seen him do, it's only been a couple of games where he's kind of, panicked a little bit and then put up interceptions and turnovers and numbers to where we've seen him have 6 turnovers a game, 5 turnovers a game, which is not what you want from your quarterback. So if they can just do probably those 2 things, I think, you have a ball game. And I'm honestly expecting a relatively close game.
All right, well, let's get an actual prediction. Does IU pull off the victory? Does Ole Miss get an upset?
I'm going Indiana, and I'm not just going Indiana because I'm an alum. I think, obviously the game is in their favor. I think Indiana is the more balanced of both of these teams. If I had to place a score prediction on it, I think I'm going like a 35-28 score prediction. So I think it's going to be kind of in that number, which is obviously lower in points than we've seen in a lot of instances from Ole Miss this season. That being said, we have seen them score in the 20s against teams, especially against good teams. I think Indiana, again, is just much more balanced to kind of hold Ole Miss off and, on the offensive side of the ball if they can do it. So I'm going 35-28.
Well, that'd be a good close game. I think fans would certainly enjoy that. And Courtney, really appreciate you coming on today. Great breakdown of Ole Miss. I think Indiana fans now feel ready for the game, so appreciate you coming on today.
Anytime. Thanks for having me.
That will do it for today's episode of Unpaid Interns. We will be back after the Outback Bowl on January 4th to break down the results of the game. Until then, have a great New Year's, everyone, and we'll talk to you later.